Muchos.
And we're ready? Yes. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Gonzales Unified School District Special Board Meeting for Tuesday, July 27, 2021. May we all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Maria, can you lead us?
Sure. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And can we please get roll call? Monica?
Board President Lopez,
Present.
Trustee Cuevas, present. Trustee Flores, present. Trustee Ayon,
Present.
and Trustee Celeste, or Daniel, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Moving on to item number 3, welcome guests. I see that we have Dr. Drake here, Dr. Galicia. Yesenia, sorry, Yesenia, I forgot your name. And our superintendent, and I think your superintendent's going to introduce to the community our newest addition to the Gonzales Unified School District family.
Good evening, members of the board and community. I'd like to take the opportunity this evening to introduce Ms. Monica Silva, who is the new administrative superintendent, who is the new administrative assistant to the superintendent and the board. So Monica, can I have you appear on camera so people can put a face with a name?
Sure, would you like me to go to the podium?
We'll have you right here.
Right
Okay,
here.
perfect,
There we go.
perfect. Hi, my name is Monica Silva. I am the new Sofia Ramirez and the new administrative assistant to the superintendent. I am happy to be here and join this wonderful team in Gonzales. Feel free to, if you guys ever want to meet with superintendent, give me a ring, give me a buzz, stop by the office. More than welcome. Doors are open. Give us a ring. Look forward to hearing from you guys.
Thank you, and welcome to our Gonzales Unified School District family. Moving on to, we did the pledge already. Approval, number 5, approval of agenda. May I get a motion, please?
So move, Araceli.
Okay, it's been moved by-
Second, Cuevas.
it's been moved and second. Can I get all those in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Carries for, it's been approved and it's been, motion passed. It's been a month. Okay, moving on to item number 6, public comments. At this time, members of the public may address the board on topics that are under the jurisdiction of the board. For public comments on items not on the agenda, the board may not discuss nor take action during this meeting. Comments from the public shall be limited to 3 minutes on any topic. The board may limit the total time of public input on any topic to 20 minutes unless it chooses to waive the item limit for a particular item. At this time, do we have any public comments?
We have no public comments this evening.
Great. Moving on to number 7, study session, and 7.1, budget study session. So tonight's special board meeting is in regards to our budget. So with that, Superintendent.
Thank you, Board Member Lopez. So this evening, I would like to acknowledge that Dr. James Drake, as well as Ms. Yesenia Argueta, are here to co-present, and we're involved in the development of the presentation and discussion that will be following my statement. What the board will be receiving this evening is in fact a presentation, a PowerPoint, which takes slides that the board saw as part of the Masters in Governance program, embedded with information specific to Gonzales Unified School District. I'm going to hand the packets out at this point in time. I am going to ask that you start with the PowerPoint, and we will indicate to the board when to look at the additional items that are attached. So I'll wait for a moment for those to go around. What we would also like to encourage the board to do is to feel free to ask questions or comment as we're moving through each section, because I think that our hope is that one of the outcomes of this evening be an understanding of what you've learned and what it connects to specifically within our district. So as we continue, and I'm going to ask for Monica to go ahead and project the PowerPoint. So as we continue this evening, on our next slide, you will see our intended outcomes. We are hoping to increase and enhance the board's understanding of the budget process. That includes responsibilities of the board and responsibilities of staff. We'd like to talk a little bit about current and temporary changes within school finance. And you will hear from Dr. Drake and Ms. Argueta regarding the special one-time funding that we're receiving via COVID and pandemic relief. We are going to review some financial principles and concepts. This is an area that the board has already had initial learning in, so it will probably go very quickly. but we are going to focus on what our revenue and expenditures are here within the district. We're going to talk a little bit about LCF. And as I said, once again, we have various pots of money that are one-time monies that we'll continue to elaborate on. We'll touch on the budget process overall. We will also review oversight because the board does have fiduciary responsibility for the budget. And then we'll touch on school facilities and finance and negotiations between coming to closure. As we continue, you will also see in our next slide that we have hyperlinked the information we have both to the CSBA website as well as to previous board presentations that Business Services has provided. The slide that you're looking at up above is actually the CSBA slide, which talks about effective governance. As members of the board heard last night in a CSBA presentation, the board does the what for the organization, and it is staff who is responsible for the how. Continuing, the board has also talked, we can go back one. The board has also talked about its responsibilities specifically in the areas of finance. CSBA, the California School Boards Association, outlines 5 different areas. The first is setting the direction, and this parallels all aspects of the board's responsibility to the district in terms of developing and setting the direction and vision for Gonzales Unified. The second is establishing the structure. The third is creating a supportive environment in which staff works. The fourth is ensuring accountability. And the fifth is providing community leadership throughout. CSBA uses a graphic that you see located in the middle. It looks like an egg almost that has a crack through the middle of it. The top are areas that are the governance team's responsibility, and the blue area below are those responsibilities of district staff. One other aspect that we'd like to review has to do with legislation that has shaped school finance. We'll transition. So I'm not going to read every indicator on this slide, but I do want to remind the board of some significant legislative bills that have impacted school finance. Going back all the way to 1978, that was the introduction of collective bargaining. The district currently has 2 collective bargaining associations, that being the Gonzales Teachers Association and the second being CSEA. The guidelines for our bargaining were decided on all the way back in 1978. The public also needs to know that lottery and lottery funding was an important change. That was in addition to previous school finance that we have received. Proposition 13, unique to California, gave a definitive cap on how much funding could actually be collected and used in education. Class size reduction was a time when we went from 32 as an average in our kindergarten through 3rd grade classes to now what is an average of 24. The board in the future will be hearing of additional class size reductions specific to TK, our transitional kinder. Over the period of 3 years, the district will be reducing class size from 24 down to 10. We have the Williams Act, which ensures that students and teachers have the materials that they need to teach, to learn, and in fact, that facilities are conducive to learning. And most recently, we have our local control funding formula, which brings the control of funding down to the community in which it's intended. As we move on, you'll also see a summary of board responsibilities. So the board responsibilities include establishing the priorities, using the development process to ensure that the budget reflects and reinforces the priorities of Gonzales Unified, to monitor and support implementation of the budget, and to review and audit the budget. The next slide will also show the statutory requirements, and that means the legal requirements of our board. First is that they approve a tentative and final budget, that they approve budget revisions that are brought back to them, that they receive and certify 2 interim financial reports, that they select an auditor and accept the auditor's report, and that they establish fiscal policies. The leadership team's roles and responsibilities, I elaborated on what the board's was. The superintendent develops the board to implement the district's vision. So the board doesn't build the budget, but they respond to the budget that has been built by staff. The CBO is accountable for the quality of information and day-to-day monitoring. And Dr. Drake is going to talk a little bit about those documents that he's required to sign with his credential, as well as those that I'm required to sign as superintendent, ensuring the fiscal viability of our districts. And principals and staff are primarily responsible for determining needs to best meet our students and community's needs in regards to learning and growth. So at this point in time, I'm going to pause to see if there's any questions. I think the CSBA slides are basically a review for board. And Ms. Chayon.
How does the board go about developing budget priorities specifically?
So since the money of the board is primarily LCFF money, we go through the LCFF process, which means that all stakeholders have to be consulted, and the board's responsibility is to act on the recommendation of the stakeholders. And so when Ms. Barba comes in and gives you the information regarding the 1,000+ people that were surveyed or the small groups that we conducted, what came out of that were their goals and aspirations as stakeholders. And then it comes to the board in the LCFF plan, which we bring in June. And at that point in time, the board either accepts what has been brought to them or they ask for changes and modifications.
And is this to do with the LCAP as well?
So LCAP is the document and LCFF is the funding mechanism for LCAP.
Right, but the LCAP is where you have the meetings with the stakeholders, correct? And establish what they would like to be the priorities of the school?
Correct, but they're interdependent, they're connected, because the LCFF funding then needs to be, it needs to sustain, either introduce, sustain, or exclude the goals and objectives that have been developed.
Right, so LCFF is basically the pot of money. LCAP is what to do with that pot of money. Is that
That's correct. LCFF has a few other elements, as you'll see when we go through the presentation. The board has heard about supplemental concentration. Those funds have specific designations that the board does not have discretion as to who they're spent on. The board does have input into how we spend, but any money spent from concentration and supplemental grant funding, LCFF, has a particular subgroup that it has to be spent on. And Yesenia will actually be talking a little bit more about that.
Okay. Any other questions? Can you clarify the school site councils would, this is where they would, how do they play into this formula?
So the school site council also will on an annual basis go over the school's budget. As a reminder to community, the school site council is the group of elected representatives at a school site. It is a site-based equivalent of the district governance team. They will receive information not only in terms of the allocation of LCFF, but we also have some federal funding that is distributed at the site level, such as Title I funding, Title III funding. they would receive an overview from the site leadership around not only the amounts, but how they are being expended. And then the school site council has to vote and sign that they approve those expenditures.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Drake?
Superintendent Irving. I don't have a microphone, so I'm wondering.
Oh.
Share. Drake, just one last question on the
Okay.
school site council. So that's it, you said that each site has a school site council, correct? So
Correct.
each of our 3 sites. Can we get a list of who the members are for each of those
Yes.
Sites?
So it'll be the list from 2021 because elections will occur as soon as we come back in August.
And those elections are held how? Like, how does one run for school site council or show interest in?
There's a call for nominations, and parents or individuals can be nominated by the community or they can be nominated by themselves. They can self-select. And we can send you a copy of the bylaws that are reviewed with the sites in terms of the election process and how they're seated.
And who may follow up on that? I've attended a couple in the past year at all the sites actually. And usually what, in my experience or what I saw then is on the first meeting that the principals call, they invite actually all the parents and members of the community to come to begin the formation of the group. And during the first meeting, him along with Ms. Yolanda Barba, they give a little presentation of what the purpose of the group, the school site councils, and then they tell them to step up to leadership roles within the group, forming a president, vice president, secretary. And so that, there's a structure to that. And usually that happens the second meeting, or if possible, if they can do that in the first meeting, then they can move forward for the rest of the academic year with like a leadership team and the cycles, right? So,
But there's a letter for people to vote.
correct. So
That's
there's
correct.
an
There has to be,
elections,
there has to be a ballot.
Yeah, there's
correct.
an
I'm
election.
sorry, so my question is, who does vote? Who votes?
All,
The parents and the parents at the site.
Any member of the community can vote.
Parents.
Yeah.
No, parents.
Of that.
The ballots get sent home with the students.
Oh, okay,
Correct.
so parents of students of that particular site. can vote.
Correct.
and they'll get nominated. Usually, and what I saw in the past is the parents that were there, they nominated those that were there at that meeting to step up to leadership roles.
Sometimes you're, like Maria and I experienced, sometimes you're just sitting there and you get chosen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
So specific to budget, Cesar, because there is such a large overlap in our schools between our parents and our English language learner parents, our school site councils also absorb ELAC, and this is legal because there's a designation on the agenda where they conduct ELAC business as well as school site council business. And why that's pertinent to the agenda for tonight is that ELAC parents have a right to hear and vote on Title III funding, which is federal funding that's specific to English learners, as well as to understand the implications of LCFF funding, both concentration and supplemental, that also have to have differentiated goals and objectives to meet English learner needs.
thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Drake.
Okay, thank you, Superintendent Irving. I'm going to continue by talking about the budget and what the budget is. Looking at the next slide, you'll see that there are several items listed here. Because the budget is basically the policy document that reflects the vision and priorities of the district. We were talking about the LCAP. That's the district plan. Those are the priorities. Those are the things we say we want to focus on and provide for the students and for the community. And so the budget is a reflection of that document. It shows how we're going to financially implement all of these different plans and programs that we want to put into effect. It's a proposed plan for revenues and expenditures. How are we going to spend the money and where are we going to get the money from? And I know in past meetings, we talked about different revenue sources, different expenditures, things that we're using the money for. And so we've had a lot of conversation about that. And so we've been discussing that for a while. It's an operational guide for decisions and actions. Again, it's a reflection of the LCAP. It's a reflection of the community, what we want to prioritize, what we want to provide for our students and for our families. It's a financial plan to maintain the financial health of the district because we need to have guidelines. We need to be able to balance our budget. In other words, we need to make sure that we're not spending more than we're taking in. And one point I always like to emphasize with people is that the budget is a flexible document. It's not something that's written in stone. Sometimes people can become very possessive and they can say, oh, well, you know, I have this certain account and this is my money. And what I always have to convey to them is that, no, it's not your money, it's our money, it's the district's money. And during the year, during the course of the year, we adjust the budget many different times because things change, just like your personal budget might change at home. For example, you might have a certain amount set aside each month for utilities, for rent or mortgage payments, for transportation, whatever. But sometimes things happen. Your car breaks down, or maybe something happens to your house, a window breaks, or you have to replace the roof or something. And so you have to adjust your budget and move your money into a different place because your priorities change. And the same thing happens for a school district. Our priorities change, emergencies come up, things happen. And so we have to shift our money. We have to move it sometimes. And sometimes people don't understand that. So we need to make them understand that the budget is a flexible document. It keeps changing, and we need to share our pool of resources. And so it's also a communication device to share with the community, to report to them what we're doing, to show them how we're using their funds. And lastly, it's a leadership tool because, again, it reflects our leadership, it reflects our priorities for the district and the things that we're doing to serve our community. And so moving on to our next slide, types of income. I'm going to start the slide, then I'm going to pass it off to Ms. Argueta because she's an expert in this area. But we've spoken about this also before. We've talked about our funding sources. We've talked about our state apportionment, our LCFF. We've talked about recurring versus one-time funds. This year we've had, I should say this past year, we've had a lot of one-time money coming in with our COVID-related funds to help us get through distance learning and all the related expenses we've had because of that. But we have to keep in mind that these monies are not going to be around forever. These are just temporary funds that are being provided because of the current emergency situation. And also restricted versus unrestricted. Some of the revenues that come in, we can use for many different things. Other revenues that come in have to be used for specific expenditures. And so I'm going to pass it off to Ms. Argueta, and she's going to give us more expertise in this area.
So Big Matt is actually the one that comes out with the LCFF calculator and to help us determine how much funding we're going to get for this school year. So that includes the base grant, our supplemental grant, and concentration. And out of there, then we get the EPA, which is our Education Protective Account. And
You're gonna have to speak into the micro. Yeah.
so again, the LCFF includes the base grant, which is based off of our ADA. This year, we're held harmless. But for the 22-23 school year, our entitlement will be based on actual ADA. We do have a change in our supplement grant, which was typically based on 50%, and now it's going to be 65. So that's going to start this school year. Lottery, we have two sources of lottery, which is one is restricted and the other one is non-restricted. So there's two ways to calculate. So we take our enrollment and there's two rates that are provided to us in order to determine what our entitlement is. So that's what our different types of incomes are.
Can I ask a question? In
Mhm.
regards to the lottery, hold on, let me turn this on. Funding about, so people out there in the community can hear,
Yes.
about how much, what is a total number, like our budget for last year? Do you have those numbers?
Well, actually, I have this year, what we budgeted was 416,000.
Okay, so it's,
Yeah, but each year it
It
changes.
changes.
There's a different formula that they provide us, and but for this year it's 416, which is a combination of both restricted and unrestricted
any
monies.
other board? Cesar, you-
So the lottery funds were like 1% of our
Yeah,
budget, basically.
so,
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's,
so
yeah,
it's
yeah.
tiny. So when you buy a lotto, it's not going to school.
Right, right,
That's
yeah.
the
And
gist
it
of
should
that.
be
Really.
used for instructional materials.
Yeah.
More than anything, yeah.
I'm sorry, I was trying to write notes and you said a component of the budget increased, I think, from 50 to 65%. What was
So
that?
that was for our concentration grant. That rate went from 50% to 65, starting at the beginning of this fiscal year for the 21-22
And
school year.
just for the edification of everybody here, including myself, concentration grants are,
So that is part of your LCAP. So you have both. You have your supplement grant and your concentration grant. So you need to spend those monies on targeted students, your population of students, which those include your English learners, your foster and your homeless students. Those are additional that you need to.
so is that a good thing that it increased from 50% to 65%?
Yeah, it is. It's
So they're
additional.
covering more of our costs, basically 15% more.
15, little
Yeah.
bit more.
It is to be understood, though, that it is a temporary move by the state because we have so much learning loss experienced and compounded by virtue of a student being homeless, foster, English language learner. And this year, in fact, Business Services will talk a little bit more about special education funding as well, has increased unilaterally simply to help districts with the learning loss experienced by those students.
So this increases solely as a result of COVID, one-time funds, and historically, can we say historically, the funding percentage has been 50% or
Yes,
thereabouts?
historically, it's a static amount. There is opportunity to continue at the 65% rate, depending on the revenues for the state of California. So currently, Governor Newsom is very involved with school funding. And while he's in office at a minimum, we believe he'll continue to fight for that. But that's also very dependent on making sure that the revenue is coming into the state. And the projections for revenue coming into the state are not as necessarily as optimistic as the governor's office at this point in time.
Right, so worst case scenario, the expectation of schools, not just ours, but every school is 50%. And
That it would go
And
back to
if it-
50%.
things work out, you can potentially see more.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board? Great.
So our next slide has a pie chart here that reflects our total revenues. So we could see that the majority comes from our LCFF sources. It's about 73%. Federal revenues, 13%, state revenues, 8%, and local revenues, 6%.
And this is the same slide we presented to you for our second interim report.
Mhm, mhm.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then other funds that make our budget complete is our building construction, developer fees, facilities, state school building, state bond monies, deferred maintenance, which is restricted, cafeteria is restricted, adult education is restricted, child development restricted. We have the self-insurance, special reserve, which is restricted, and then we have ASB.
What is self-insurance?
So that are monies that we have to put aside because, well, we're considered part of a JPA. So we have to put aside monies for our insurance.
We're part of a cooperative, and so we insure ourselves as a group.
And the board would understand that to be McSig. Continuing.
So here you'll see a snapshot of our SACS reports out of our escape system, and that's our fiscal system that we use. So here you'll see a snapshot. This one is our general fund.
So,
sorry.
so for the community, this document will be placed on the website with the presentation to the board. For the board, we've printed out a copy of our revenue sources. You have it in the packet that I just provided to you. It's the vertical for your eyes, yes. Okay. And then Yesenia is going to walk you through each of those additional funding sources that she just described.
So here on the first one, so we're going through our general fund. So here you'll see the different revenues and expenditures that are included. And please note that the actual column on this report will change when we close the books. So when we close the books, we'll come back to the board and do the unaudited actuals. And then you'll see a true picture of what 2021, 22 was. 2021, sorry,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah, so the fund balance totals will change.
Yes. So next we have adult education. And you'll see there are the federal revenues, other state revenues and local revenues and what their expenditures have been.
I have a couple of comments in regards to adult education. You know, I had the opportunity to participate in the graduation ceremony of our adult students, and which was a highlight, you know, and something that it was the first time I've experienced being part of that. And I think that's an area that we as a board should consider in promoting more in our community. And to all the families out there listening, please get involved. If you're, you know, it was a very emotional evening, like everything else. And you know, seeing families come together and not only have students graduating at the high school level, but also some of the parents of those students also walking through at the adult program. So I think if we as a board can, you know, do something to kind of highlight and also, you know, bring in more resources or to expand this opportunity for our adults in our community to, you know, receive their high school education or the equivalency certificate, I think it would be a great benefit for our community in the long term. So, you know, that's what I have on in regards to adult education. So
Yeah,
hopefully,
on adult ed, I fully agree with everything you said. In fact, I think we should offer more services, or maybe not more, well, certainly more, but at least as many as we offered before, specifically the forklift class. I've had multiple people contact me about that. It's a certification that you can get. It's probably a couple of weeks or something like that. And we have a whole lot of companies here in town that are looking for forklift drivers. So that has a direct effect, classes like that. And of course, the GEDs are very important as well.
Yeah.
Since a lot of our parents actually some of them have education in Mexico, it just
Yeah,
doesn't
you're right.
translate, right? So they come here and it's like they don't, so.
yeah, no, you're great. So, thank you.
So the next fund is our Child Development Fund. And there's new monies also coming in for the child development for early education. So that would include our preschool and for TK. So that is, but this is what we currently get. It's not a lot, but hopefully we'll be getting more monies to support our early education. Then we have the cafeteria fund. So that should be self-sustaining. So our director does a really good job in doing that outreach. So we're doing okay right now for that.
And it's, from what I've gathered in our community, it's one of the, well, a highlight for many of our families that we're able to feed not only their students, but the program kind of expanded this summer. And I mean, that was a blessing for our community. And I hope that, you know, as a board, we can continue to support those kind of initiatives to help our families in our community.
And on the cafeteria fund, now all our kids get
Yeah.
free lunch, basically, or not just lunch, but brunch and snacks and such. So irrespective of income. Now, Governor Newsom recently changed. And I don't, what effect does that law have on our school in terms of funding, as far as that everybody now will qualify for a free lunch throughout the state? Does that have any effect on our funding? A positive effect?
It has a positive effect. There is additional funding coming, but once again, this is considered temporary funding.
Yeah.
The legislation has a definitive period of time, and it will sunset, and then the legislation will have an opportunity, legislatures will have an opportunity to revisit it. But Alvin does an exceptional job at using our budget to feed our students and feeding all of our children in the community if they so need it.
Yeah, the more meals we serve, the more reimbursements we get. And so the more people we're serving, then that helps us financially.
And we're still doing the program, the summer feeding continuing, or did it stop already? The program, so.
It's still continuing.
Still going, correct?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
When exactly can they, what's the process for them to participate in this program?
Did they just come and pick up their meal, right?
So there's actually a form that needs to be completed. The form does not need to be completed before service, but the district will follow up to make sure that all parents complete the form, because that's the documentation that the district needs in order to obtain the funding.
Is it just to fill in the name and kind of, or do they
No,
require?
it is a government form, so it's not as simple as,
So is it
we would
an
like.
intimidating form? Because I'm just thinking
can
of
be.
our community
can be.
members.
but our sites, our nutritional services staff are exceptional.
Okay, great.
They speak English y también hablan español,
Muy bien.
so they can help complete any forms. They can help support parents.
So for the parents that are interested in participating in the program, go to the site and ask for the form. And then once that is done, when exactly do they go pick up the food?
Well, it's the children that are picking up the food.
The
We're no
children.
longer packing it. We're no longer under the same guidelines as we were with COVID. I do want the board to remember, though, prior to the governor's generous continuation to feed all, Gonzales Unified fed 87% of its student body. And so when we're talking about now we're going to feed all, that's only 13% of our parents who have not completed the form and in fact hadn't been participating.
Well, hopefully we get that 13%.
Yes.
So overall, I mean, we've been proactive in that area.
Yes.
Thank you. Moving on to,
So the next fund you'll see is a deferred maintenance. And this is basically where our developer fees would go into to upgrade our facilities. The building fund, so this is where the money would go for our bonds. So I don't know if, James, if you would like to.
Yes, and we did have a successful bond issue this past spring. We talked about that, and we brought that to the board earlier. And so the money that we generated through that bond issue is now in our building fund, and we are starting to draw from that as we're planning our renovation projects. And soon we will be selecting our architect so that we can start planning the design and construction of our new elementary school.
in regards to the last item we had to pull at the last board meeting, has that been resolved?
Yes,
for the
yes,
stadium?
that's been resolved. We've received a revised proposal that meets all the requirements. And so we'll be bringing that back to you at our next meeting, and hopefully everything will be fine.
Great, thank you.
And then the next fund is our capital facilities fund. What does this cover?
The capital facilities fund?
This is for our current facilities needs.
Just like basic facility needs,
So-
like supplies.
Okay.
Yes.
The deferred maintenance is specifically to upgrading or repairing. This is the day-to-day.
Yes.
For example, the tree that fell at Fairview Middle School, would that fall under this?
Yes, because actually we purchased
Some chainsaws.
chainsaws.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank
Yeah, the
you.
state requires us to have the deferred maintenance fund because they want to see that we're planning and that we're putting money aside for improvements and for repairs and things that we're going to need.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so our next slide, we're talking about the LCAP and the district budget. So this is where the public becomes educated on the district priorities, and then the board would adopt the LCAP based on those recommendations.
So if I can bring the board's attention specifically to the second bullet, because that helps to inform that basically the board does not build LCAP. The board is compelled to vote on those areas that the community has in fact identified. And so the board helps to make sure that there is an alignment between the funding the district receives and that it's expended on the goals and aspirations of the community we serve.
Should it be clarified though that everything that is asked on the LCAP doesn't necessarily doesn't necessarily get funded? Oh, did you hear me?
Go ahead.
That everything that is asked on the LCAP does not necessarily mean we have funding for everyone's wants. Can you can you explain that a little bit?
That is correct. So we surveyed over 1,000 staff, parents, and students for the most recent LCAP. And every one of those individuals had a list of things that they would like to see the district pursue. Regrettably, the amount of funding that we receive through LCAP limits how many of those things we can implement. And so what happens in the development of the LCAP is that those items that had multiple requests, such as mental health services with an LCSW, are then included in the budget, the LCFF budget that we bring forward to the board.
Okay, so our next slide, again, it shows the breakdown for our LCFF calculation. Again, the base grant, the supplemental, and the concentration grants. And then here, we're looking at a snapshot of what has been our ADA and enrollment. We're gonna have to really monitor that this coming year because for the 2023 school year, will be funded on actual
That's the actual numbers.
actual ADA, and there will be no held harmless for the 2023 school year.
So the ADA for the next year will be based on this year's.
And the actual
Yes.
numbers of attendance.
Yes, for this
So
year.
this current year will be based on the held harmless, which was in the 1920.
Mhm.
Going into 21-22, the school year that we're entering, we will no longer be held harmless.
And this is, speaking out to the community, to our families, I know that we've had many families transfer out of our district over the past year or so. So, this is, an effort on the part of all of us here in the community to really moving forward. There's a lot of projects building of a new school. Really invite our families to reconsider, re-enrolling your students back here with us at Gonzales Unified School District. And anything you need, any questions, anything that, you might be, questions that you might have of our academic program, of the services we provide, please feel free to reach out to our superintendent and ask those hard questions, and she will get back to you and give you an honest and truthful answer. But know that we are doing the best we can here in our district to make sure that each student has the best in education so they're successful in their future.
I'd just like to add that Superintendent Irving and our Ed Services Department, led by Yolanda Barber, did a great job this summer with our summer programs. We had tremendous options for kids, all kinds of fun activities, also great learning experiences. And these are the kind of innovative things that we're doing here in the district. And so we just want to keep building on that, keep expanding on that. And I think we have some great programs going here. So we do hope that families will think about that, consider that, because again, I think that we are a district on the rise, and I think we're a great option.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and we just need to keep in mind that even prior to the pandemic, we were declining. We were already declining in ADA and enrollment. So we need to watch that and try to keep our families in the district. And the next slide talks about the parent overview. So it's the budget overview for parents. So it's like a simple way to show our parents where our LCFF monies come from. So this is done annually. So it's brought to the board and it's available for the public.
Yes, and this is the budget overview for parents that we presented at our December board meeting this past year, when we also presented our first interim report.
This is what's reviewed with parents. Is there a more simpler way of presenting?
This is the
This is
simplified.
supposed to be the simplified
This is
way.
the simplified version, and this is a template provided by the California Department of Education. The district does not have discretion for reformatting it or simplifying it.
And we had to report it this way.
But if, when we present it, can we get creative on how we present it?
Yes, you see our PowerPoints. We tend to try to represent the most important points.
We've tried to present some pie charts and graphs, trying to show the information visually or a little bit differently.
Make it simpler and easier
Yes.
to understand.
Yes.
To get complex.
So as we transition to the next slide, I'd also like to bring the board's attention to another handout, and it is the legal size paper. We're going to talk a little bit about funding that is the result of the pandemic that we are hopefully nearing the end of. The slides that you will see in front of you are actually taken from the board report that was given in January. And so we're going to go quickly through those so that we can talk with the board about the updated numbers that you have in front of you on the spreadsheet. And because in fact, the spreadsheet has additional funding that was not in existence in the January meeting.
In January, we gave a report talking about the different COVID funding sources and our status at that point in terms of our expenditures. And so you've seen this information before. We've talked about our different resources, our 3210, which is on our next slide. So if we can move forward. Again, this was our status at that time in January. Moving to the next slide, our gear funding, resource 3215. I'm going to move through these fairly quickly. Moving to our next slide, resource 7420. And then finally, on the next slide, resource 3220. And we have fully expended these funds because the deadline was, of course, June 30th. And so we've accomplished that. And so I'd like to pass it again along to Yesenia, and she can give us an update on some of the newer resources and our current status in terms of our expenditures.
Okay, so if you look at your spreadsheet there, so in the middle of the page, you'll see the new ESSER 2 funds. And we also have the new ESSER 3 funds. Those are the released amounts. The allocation, you'll see the allocation, what has actually been received and what is pending. So we need to report to the federal government a quarterly reports saying how we expended the money, and then it's like a reimbursement. So they'll reimburse us for what we have expended. And then below that, you'll see what has been encumbered, what has been expended in each of the resources. And certain ones we get to do an indirect cost if it's allowed. If it's not, we can't. And then you'll see the balance of what we need to expend. So each one has an expiration date that we need to spend the funds by, and then they'll get us reimbursed.
What happens if we don't meet that deadline? We lose those funds? We can, okay.
We lose the
So that's an
funds, yeah.
item we have to
Yeah.
keep
Yeah,
track on and make sure we use the money.
exactly. Yes, and then we do have a plan. I know that Yolanda was working on the ESSER 3 expenditure plan, which is due in October. They, it was due in September, but then they pushed it back forward to October. So we do have an actual spending plan that we need to stick to.
So those funds, I think you said we get refunded. We get refunded.
Yes, yes, we get
So-
refunded as we report during the quarterly reports.
So we don't lose the funds, we lose the refund. I guess it's,
Right,
Yes,
yes,
reimbursement.
yes.
it's not like we have.
That would, well,
pile
that
of
would
money.
come out of general
So we
fund.
Get
and-
reimbursed if we meet the statutory requirements.
Right,
of-
yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
So funds within the district that have a deadline are spent before any general funds. And so we are very proactive in making sure we spend what used to be referred to as categorical funds. We spend those first. I do want to bring the board's attention to a couple of different things. Under 7422, the in-person instruction grant, you'll see that there is a notation of a reduction based on the fact that we were not providing in-person instruction on Mondays. We had made the board aware of that. I also would like the board to be aware of 7426. It is legislation that mandates districts use that percentage of funding on paraprofessionals. It cannot be used in any other area. And so it's another example where the board oversees the funding but doesn't have the discretion to decide how it's going to be spent. And then the other one that I'd like to really emphasize is the ESSER 3. The ESSER 3 funds are going to be what allows us to continue our Saturday program, our Gonzales Preparatory Academy. It will allow us to provide a summer of 2022 summer program, similar in quality to what we experienced this summer. And so the board will not see that money spent down quickly because we are allocating it for summer of 2022 and summer of 2023.
The resource code 7422, the in-person instruction grant. So we lost, well, we didn't lose, but we didn't get refunded for about half the amount. Is that correct?
We haven't received payment yet, but we did lose the 5% based on not teaching 20% of the week, not teaching in person 20% of the week.
Oh, okay, I see. So in fact, yeah, okay. So that 5% is not the 400,000. That's just what we received. The balance, the 384,000 is what we are owed.
Yes.
Reimbursements also come in at different times.
Yeah, it's
So-
unpredictable.
Some are timely and others are not so timely.
But again, just, think our summer program, I think, just from walking, Maria and I think Araceli, not sure if Celeste and Cesar had the opportunity to walk through the summer program, but it's a highlight. The kids, the staff, parents, they all were appreciative of everything that they were doing. It was fun. They learned. And I think it's, if we keep it in that way,
Staff had fun
Yeah.
too.
yeah, of course.
Yeah, they did.
Okay, so one way to read this basically is just, where are we in the reimbursements of all these funds, correct?
We're on a continuum.
Yeah, no,
Yes.
I know, but I'm just saying it's a status update on reimbursements, correct?
That's where we
Yes.
are right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And so for resource code 7426, that just means that we haven't received anything. We're just owed the full amount.
Correct. We have not spent that down yet.
We haven't used it yet.
Oh, okay. So basically, it's not that we've lost any funds,
We
At
have lost
all.
no funds other
which
than
is-
the in-person instruction.
the imprint, that 5%,
Yes.
which was, okay. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
And I say that because what you'll also see on Yesenia's spreadsheet is the second and third column, you see that the balance is 0 because we spent those down to the last cent.
Any other questions?
So just to make sure for the public to understand is, we actually took advantage of all the funds that were provided and are just in the process of getting reimbursement for them. Correct? Is that a
Correct.
statement?
We have allocated every source of funding that we've been given as a district. And what I would also, I want to make sure though that we understand, some funding is reimbursement. Other funding is given to the district ahead of time, and then we provide the accountability documentation that the state or federal government requires.
Thank you.
We could move on to the next slide. So here you'll see a snapshot from our second interim as to the expenditures that we had. So let's see, it shows that over 70% of our expenditures are for salary, benefits, health insurance, and retirement. And so that is a big chunk of our revenues that are expended for salaries.
So the board may remember that in the letter of certification from the MCOE, it showed that Gonzales Unified currently spends 90% of its general fund on salaries. And what is also important for the community to understand is that every employee within the district receives a compensation package. And so that includes a salary, it includes health and welfare benefits, and it includes retirement. And every year, both health and welfare benefits, as well as the contribution of the district to retirement, increases. And that increase is has been significant on the district's budget and is also being temporarily offset by the funding coming from the state of California. They're dealing with that directly and not using districts as a pass-through.
And I'd just like to add, I might need to get stronger glasses here. I'm hoping I'm reading this correctly, but about 25% of our total budget goes to benefits. And so that's a huge proportion of the budget.
And it seems like it's just going to continue to rise
Yes, it will.
from, the.
Yes. Every year, our rates are going up. The contributions we have to make to STRS and PERS, the retirement systems for our certified and classified staff just keeps increasing.
So I just did a quick calculation. Classified salaries is 12%, administrative salaries is 10, employee benefits is 23, certificated salaries is 27. That equals 72, I believe. You said over 90%. So where's the other?
I said
18
over 90% of general fund.
Yes,
of general.
yes.
fund?
Of
But
general
this is-
fund.
This is the total budget.
Oh,
So,
We,
So-
I'm sorry, Superintendent, go ahead.
and you will elaborate, Dr. Drake, I'm sure, but general fund covers the employees that are on full contract and continuing. The additional salaries coming from temporary funds or federal funds are not included in that 90%. So those are the funds that are, those are the Title I, Title III funds that help to support our academic coaches. That's why they're not included in that 90%. And so if you take the entire budget of the district combined is where you will approach 75%, specifically around salary, benefits, and retirement.
And I think that's a very important distinction for the public to understand, that difference between the 72 and the over 90% is paid for, and will always be paid for by Title I and Title III.
If I could just say it slightly differently,
Yes.
general fund, yes. Title III, Title II, Title I, even Title II professional development funds, those should still be considered temporary because they're year to year. State funds, the state has an obligation to educate every child. Federal funds come in dependent on demographics, and it also comes in on federal budget. At any given time, Congress could decide it wants to allocate more to Head Start and less to Title III. So the 90% is pretty solid. The remaining funds should always be considered fluid.
But in the past, they have not been.
Well, no, they do change from year to year.
Yes.
Yeah.
The amount we get for the title grants does change.
Is it a big change? Is it 0.5%? Is it 10%? Is it, 75%? And the reason why I'm asking is because, obviously funding sources, budgets for anything is always, dependent on what you bring in. So yes, of course. So if the state or even the federal government doesn't bring in money, then how can they give it to anybody to spend it? So now, but my point is just that, Title I and Title II, Title III, have been funded. And I believe they probably have been funded in a steady manner, or is that not the case?
So actually, and I'm trying to remain apolitical, title funds change based on who's in Congress and in the White House. So the current president, education is a hot topic for him. He's invested an enormous amount of money in Head Start, not an equal amount to what the previous administration had invested. The same with our immigration. Title III has an immigrant funding line. Our funding is as contingent upon what's going on in Washington as it is in terms of numbers and demographics we're serving.
So it's a combination of things. It's a combination of, as Superintendent Irving said, politics, political situation in Washington, and also our numbers and the student population that we're serving, which can also change from year to year.
So we can, for the community out there, you can see how complex this can get. So, get educated and join us here in these important meetings for our community.
So the next slide is showing our cash flow, just a snapshot of what it was. I believe this is from our second interim. And we just need to keep a close eye on it, especially once our one-time funds are expiring. So we really need to look at that. The deferrals are supposed to go away. We're supposed to get it back what they took. So, but again, we have to keep a close eye on our cash flow.
So I'd like to also bring the board's attention to an additional packet I included. So on a daily basis, if I was to print out every line item in our budget, it would be in the hundreds of pages, between probably 500 and 800 pages. But at any given time, staff, specifically identified by the County Office of Education, can go in and pull reports for any school, any program, any individual at a moment's notice to see where we are at that point in time. So what I've provided the board is an example of an account object summary. It lists those different areas that we are expending in. So you will see adopted budget, revised budget, debit, credit, and the account balance at the end of the previous year. It's also important to recognize that we will talk about multi-year projections in a moment, but in fact, business services does a month-to-month projection. And that's why I brought this slide up from a previous presentation, just to remind both the board and the community that, as Dr. Drake said, everything changes. It's continually changing. And so our documentation, our budgeting has to change as well.
And this is a slide we presented to you, I believe, with our second interim report a couple of months ago. And at that point, I was trying to highlight the fact that we were spending a lot more than we were taking in at that time. And we had been over the 4 months, February, March, April, and May, because of those deferrals. The amount of money that we had going out was a lot more than we had coming in. And so we had gone, I believe, I think it was approximately $5 million more that we expended than we took in during that time. So I was just trying to demonstrate, the way finances were going in the district at that time, the fact that we really need to be careful and monitor the situation.
So Dr. Drake, I think we're transitioning to you to talk just a little bit about school facilities.
Yes. And of course, school facilities are a very important part of the budget because we need to maintain the facilities we have and to make renovations and repairs, and also think about new facilities for the future. And so there are several different funding sources we can use for facilities. We have what are called developer fees. When developers want to construct new buildings, they have to pay a fee because of the impact that's going to have on the school district. And so we're able to collect these developer fees from area construction companies and developers, and we do that every year. And those rates are set. We are currently working with a consultant on a study that will allow us to hopefully collect a higher rate of developer fees. We're trying to get level 2 developer fees in place. Right now, we just have level 1. And so hopefully that will happen, and that will increase our resources in this area. Also, we,
Interrupt. Is that something that you partner with the city in regards to developer fees?
no, because that's something that we collect independently.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And so there also are, there are local funding sources that we use, local tax sources, although that's not a major revenue source for us. And then there are state matching funds. And as you see here in the slide, the voters of the state did support that back in 2016, and those bonds were issued in 2017. We are currently not receiving any state construction funds. However, we are getting ourselves in line. We're applying to receive those funds when they do become available again. So hopefully, once we get our new elementary school underway, we will be able to receive some of those state construction funds. There is a proposal to put that back on the ballot next year. And so hopefully, if that passes, then there will be more funds available, and hopefully we can get a chunk of that money. And then moving on, board responsibilities and facilities management. Of course, as a management team, we put together plans in terms of maintaining and upgrading our facilities, but we also want the board to be involved in managing that as well, because we want the board's input. We want them to be thinking about, we want your ideas as far as bringing back ideas from the community, talking with your constituents about the type of facilities they want, the type of services we need to provide. And so we want to adopt a master plan for school facilities based on those needs. We also, of course, ask for your approval when we select various professionals to either renovate or construct these facilities. For example, contractors, architects, consultants. We also want your approval and your assistance in helping us select the best funding options, to think about the different types of funding that are available and how we can best utilize those different sources. And then also, once funded, we depend on your assistance and your input in terms of overseeing these projects and approving these projects as they progress. And then looking at the next slide, these are some examples of the different types of funding sources that are available for facilities renovation and construction. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we have issued bonds based on passing those referendums last November. And so we have our Measure K, which is for renovation of existing facilities, and Measure J, which is the bond issue for construction of the new elementary school. And these are also a couple of additional sources that could be used for those purposes.
Excuse me, I have a question. There was a previous measure, gosh, like 10 years ago. Was it measure G, something like that?
Ours?
Yeah,
Measure N.
It was measure N.
it was a measure N, yeah. Is there any money left there?
That didn't
ha-
pass.
No?
That
So
didn't pass because I think about 20 years ago, there was a bond that passed that was somewhat confusing. And so measure N didn't pass because of the confusion of the past
previous bond.
from the previous bond.
And the
So
previous fund, has that money all been spent? Or is there?
We have a very small amount left in that bond.
There is a small amount left. I'm in the process of talking with some bond consultants now about whether it would be proper for us to actually spend that money, because it has been such a long time. There's a time limitation on using those bond funds. And so we need to be sure that if we do spend that money, we can do so legally.
Dr. Drake, maybe through Yvette, maybe you can bring update on that to the board in the future on that
Yes,
particular
we can do
item.
that.
Way we-
that would probably
Yes.
be good because I know when measure N was being campaigned on, there was a lot of confusion as to why the school was passing it, putting an N, the measure N, when 20 years ago there was this bond
Mhm.
and nobody really knew what was being done, what had been done with it. So it'd be informative to have something if possible.
And for us to be totally transparent, the bond that passed had ballot language that stated that the district would be building a new school. And I can't speak to why that language was included, because you cannot even then build a new school for $6 million. But the community, in reading that, expected to have a contract with the district and see this new school built, and it didn't happen. And so subsequently, as Board Member Flores said, Measure N did not pass. The district was very fortunate to pass Measure J and K because of the community's confidence that we're going to honor what we put in print in those ballots.
And I think, at least from my part, when I was out there campaigning with the superintendent, I told the community, and I promised them that we were going to build a school if the bonds were going to pass. So it's on my also responsibility to make sure that those funds get used for the purpose of what we told the community members out there.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
right.
I'm
Sorry. Jalen?
Yeah, and my point is, obviously we are finally going to build a new school, and this time is real, not imagined. And so if there are funds still left over, and some, maybe we can get some type of legal opinion on it, as far as, because I imagine building a new school is building a new school. So if there's architect fees, if there are, any type of other fees that maybe there's $800,000 left over, which is, very little. I'm just throwing out a number. I don't know that that's the number, by any way, but I'm just saying any amount that's left over that we can use for services that we will still need to pay for. I think we should definitely take advantage of that.
So Dr. Drake is working with the board's bond consultant, Dale Scott, to see if in fact it continues to be viable for us to use those bond funds. Because I do believe Dr. Drake is correct that there is a statute of limitations. So he is in the process, he's in contact with Dale Scott, and we'll bring back an update to the board.
And if there's any other bonds too from way back that we have in the books that there's still funds, we might as well take a look at that.
There's nothing else that I'm aware of, but
We
we'll
will-
look.
Okay,
We wish.
thank you,
Okay.
thank
Okay.
you. Thank you for
We'll
that.
bring the update back to you.
So I'm going to transition to reports, because one of the reports that is by far the most important is the certification of our interims.
Mhm.
As we've discussed, the board receives a first interim report from Business Services, followed by a second interim report. This is a document that is filed with the state of California. You will see via the hyperlink in the title, but this document is lengthy, and it is also signed by Dr. Drake, assuring that a CBO, a licensed CBO, has reviewed it and that it meets state requirements. So as we continue, there are two other areas that I'd like to focus on, and it's specifically to help support the board in evaluating its budget, as well as making sure that the board is aware of certain risks that CSBA has captured in a document. So when the board is looking at a final budget, and that final budget for us comes in with LCFF, because that's where the greatest chunk of money comes in, we as staff bring you a budget that is in alignment with the answers to the questions you see in front of you. It will be balanced. As per board direction, we are reducing and working towards eliminating deficit spending. We have maintained adequate reserves as verified by the county office and the state of California. The priorities in LCAP have been the priorities for how we expend our funds. It is comprehensive, and specifically to this, I will also tell you that I've told staff it's too comprehensive, because an LCAP, which is 130 pages, is not user-friendly to the community that in fact it is supposed to be supporting. So we are working on doing executive summaries and consolidating our LCAP. It will include, our budget will include other funds, as you saw this evening. Salary improvements are included. Salary improvements are not just compensation because it's a compensation package for every employee, which means we bring forward the projected growth in STRS contribution, PERS contribution, healthcare costs. And the board also needs to be aware that we continue to work towards minimum wage increases. Not all of our classified staff is at a level that's going to continue to meet an increase in minimum wage. And we make sure that our budget is in alignment with our LCAP plan. I would also add to the CSBA slide that the budget for Gonzales Unified also aligns with our WASC goals for our high school. So just as a reminder, in June, Business Services brought you a consolidated report. So it is a repeat of what our revenues were for the year. Continuing, it will also illuminate expenditures for the year. If we can go to the next slide. Okay. And possibly the most important slide is the third one. And the third slide is expenditure by function summary. What the board will see is that this particular slide indicates to the board and the community how we're spending our money. And so by far, where we spend the most money is within instruction and instruction-related services. And this is something that the board will want to monitor, because what our business services department has done is align expenditures with our LCAP goals, and it acts as a safety net to make sure all monies are expended in the areas as identified by LCAP. As the board is monitoring and looking at slides such as the one that I showed you from business services, once again, the board is compelled to make sure that student learning and achievement is at the forefront, that school safety for both students and staff is continually monitored and upgraded, and that professional development for teachers and all staff is accessible. Boards should be looking if resources are benefiting students. It's difficult in this budget year because the typical measurements of our effectiveness as a district have been suspended, and those primarily are standardized tests. It's that we are proactive also in dealing with a possible decrease in enrollment, and that we are also very cognizant of what funding is coming from the state and for how long it's coming. That's why you continually hear me referring to temporary funds. It's because we don't want to do any planning based on what are currently soft funds. Dr. Drake will bring you information in terms of if the assumptions were correct, and also if we need to seek additional sources of funding to accomplish our goals. Case in point for the district is building a new school. So our multi-year projections. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Yesenia.
Just a quick recap. So basically, from slide number 3, I guess a summary you can say is that out of $34 million, $25 million are spent on student service, on instruction and instruction-related services and pupil services. Just a
Correct.
summary.
Correct.
We wanted to simplify the report out of silly, so I'm trying to do that for the public. Thank you.
Okay, so for our multi-year projections, so this is something that is required that we do for each interim and when we're building our budget. So we have to look at 2 or 3 years out to see if the district is able to sustain the expenditures that we have. So what is included in our projections? We go to the next slide. We do include step and column longevity for our current staff. And this is a snapshot of what you would see in our, I believe this is second interim. So the years that we project out. And then the next slide, our budget assumptions. So we look at what our ADA is, right? And then we look at, okay, this is our current staff levels. And we say, okay, our goal is to have the same, right? And if we don't, that also, this is a tool to help us to see, okay, are we gonna be able to sustain for the second, third year, okay? We do include the increases per FIGMAT. They say, okay, this is what you need to project for your STRS increases, for your PERS increases. So those are included in our multi-years. We also include increases for health and welfare, for insurance. Health insurance goes up every year. So that is another assumption that is included in our multi-year. Our unemployment insurance went up this year by more than 1%. The governor was going to sign a bill saying that he was going to reduce it. So there wasn't going to be such an increase. So that's going to help a little, but that's a one time. So we don't know what unemployment rates are going to be for in the future. Workers' comp also went up, our claims went up. So all of those factors need to be included in our multi-year projections.
And I'm sorry. go ahead. I was gonna say on that, since enrollment, ADA and attendance enrollment is so important in regards to how much money we receive. Can we get an update at the next board meeting for each individual site? What is the enrollment that we have so far? I believe the next meeting is August 10th. So I imagine, and I know that number might be fluid, but it's probably going to be pretty accurate since most people would have to have already enrolled. So I think it's going to give us a good idea of what the numbers look like. And also if we can have, just for a sense of comparison, what was it last year during COVID and the year before? That way we can do the comparison that way, and we can see whether that trend is positive or negative. Yeah.
So we will bring you back that data as requested. Just a brief update, I can tell you that we've already grown a class at La Gloria. We have an additional kindergarten class of 22 kids. The one thing that will be semi-problematic though is we've had 2 years of hold harmless. So you'll have the numbers for this year and you'll have the numbers from 2018-19. Okay.
I have a question. Do we have data specifically for how much unemployment and workers' comp has increased just like
Yes.
individually? Can we see that? Because the unemployment and workers' comps, I don't think that's one cost that we don't really talk about a lot. So is there a way we can get, when we get a report, that information's included?
Yes. Dr. Drake can bring that
Yeah, we
back
can
at
do
our
that,
August
Cindy.
10th
Yeah,
meeting.
we'll work on that.
That's a great request. I think we should also include the STRS and PERS, basically any decrease or decrease, increase or
Increase.
decreased percentage.
Increase.
That way we can have a good idea, a better idea.
We'd love for it to decrease.
Yeah, and that's not going to happen.
Okay, great. Thank you, Cesar and Madison.
STRS, PERS, workman's comp, unemployment. Okay. So one additional reminder for the board is that we also are monitored and have to have approval by the County Office of Education. So Dr. Colleen Stanley is in direct contact with Dr. Drake regarding any budget submittals, and then myself and the board president receive communication from the county superintendent as to whether or not our budget is approved. The budget is approved as qualified, not qualified, or a
Positive or negative.
positive, negative qualification. Our district, at least over the last 3 years, has always had a positive qualification. And please remember that that qualification looks 3 years out. In addition, we, the board and the district, contract out for oversight. So Dr. Drake is going to talk a little bit about our annual audit and our partnership with auditors.
And in the interest of time, it's going to be just a little bit. I'm sure that you are all aware that we are required to have an outside independent agency audit our financial records. And so we do have Eide Bailey as our current company that does that for us, to make sure that we are in compliance, to make sure that we are following all the rules, and to make sure that we have our internal controls in place and that we are acting responsibly in terms of our fiduciary responsibilities.
We've never had an issue in that regard.
The district has not had an issue. Our individual sites have had issues with auditing. One of the sources of income that you saw in one of our first slides was ASB. ASB, the board and the superintendent and CBO are responsible for, but they have absolutely no contact with. And so that's why we've had ASB findings, which have been included in the auditor's final report to the board at the early spring.
And if I could just bring up something, because ASB is now going to be included in our financial system. So that is something new that will come to the board because we need to establish an account, Fund 08 for ASB, because it has to be included in our financials now.
So does that mean you'll be monitoring it?
We would have
I'm
to
happy
get
with that.
information from the sites as far as monies coming in and expenditures, because that needs to be
Transparency.
part
That
of
just
our
means
interims and our
Everything
budget.
needs, people need to fill out paperwork correctly. Everything needs to be
Yes.
done.
The
Dot your
address.
i's, cross your t's. kind
Yeah,
of stuff.
exactly.
Thank you.
Now ASB is not reviewed by the auditing, is that correct? But
It-
it's
it is.
included,
It
but
is.
it's gonna start being included or it's included?
It hasn't historically been included in the district
Financial
record
system.
keeping financial system. And what we're learning this evening is that it now will be. And so that in fact is to the benefit of the superintendent and the board.
Transparency
Yeah,
also.
well, accountability too.
Yeah, and
Accountability.
I
Yeah.
believe that's a result of a current law change, correct?
Yes, it
Right,
is.
so it's actually something we have to do.
Yes.
And it's
But
good.
so now, just for clarification for the parents, so ASB is the organization that that manages fundraising at the high school. But there
Associate
are
Student
separate
Body.
organizations at each site. At Gloria, at Fairview. So when you do fundraising, there has to be a mechanism to do that, approval and all that. Now, that's going to be reported as well. Is that what you're saying at all the sites?
So what you're referring to are our home and school clubs. And at two of our sites, they are transitioning to PTAs, Parent Teacher Associations. So they, in fact, as part of PTA, will have additional requirements in addition to what the district has around finances.
So PTA will manage those functions then?
PTA has certain requirements in terms of their bookkeeping, what they're allowed to fundraise for, what they're allowed to expend. It's a structure to make sure that resources are being applied to need.
So basically, in short, the fundraising mechanism that we've been used to is going to change at all the sites.
I mean, no disrespect, but I have not seen consistent fundraising at all three schools. It's not been consistent in the time that I've been here. We have some schools that raise more money than others. We have some schools that sell things to obtain money where others seek out donations. I think this will bring some consistency to fundraising and donations within the district.
And can maybe moving forward in the beginning of the year, if we can have the ASB or do a workshop for them as to how we want them to comply with this? Is that something that we can engage them in?
So myself, the CBO, the Director of Finance, the school principals, as well as the ASB clerks at each site, all take a training from an outside entity so that we all sign a document saying that we have attended the training and we understand our responsibilities.
So you guys are going to be directly overseeing it to make sure that
Yes,
our clubs and our groups, they're all in compliance.
yes,
And those leaders within the groups, that's what I mentioned, the workshop, so that they know what they're expected to do.
yes,
to
they
do.
are trained. Yes.
And just a final question for clarification. So Ed Bailey, I'm probably mispronouncing it.
Heidi Bailey.
So they do only the auditing part of our books. Is that correct?
That's correct.
the audit firm for the district.
So the auditing entity, who does our books? In regards to, I mean, obviously Yesenia is the director of fiscal services. She's got to input information into a system. Where is that system?
It's located at the Monterey County Office of Education, and it's referred to as Escape. And myself, the Director of HR, the Director of Financial Services, the CBO have a certain level of permission. And then depending on the position in business services or my administrative assistant, there are other levels of permission.
Okay, so basically you guys use Escape software to enter information that's then processed. A report that folks might be familiar with is, of course, the pay warrants report. And that's the most common one given at board meetings for the public to read. So do you guys run the system? So you enter the information, do you also run reports, or does MCOE do all of that?
No,
MCOE also does audits for us
Right.
when we do payroll, accounts payable, all our deposits, all of that is overseen.
Yeah,
by
They
the county.
oversee it.
They check
Yeah,
make
and
sure
they
we're entering
audit,
everything
and they audit
correctly.
us and ask for additional documentation, so, yeah.
Yes.
so the same way I can go in at any moment in time and look at a report, so can the county superintendent. So can the CBO for the county office.
Yeah.
Like the second pair of eyes.
Yeah.
Correct.
So specifically on the pay warrants report, who determines how to run it, what the output should be? And specifically, you guys made a change, which I thought was a good change, which was a lot more transparent and didn't just do the fund code. You guys did all the SARS codes, which I thought was very useful for the public. So was that something that you guys were able to do, or did you have to ask MCOE to make that change for that report?
Our personnel had to do that.
So your personnel.
MCOE does not require that of us. We did that out of a courtesy to the board.
And I invite the public to, that information is out there now. And you guys can see it, go down the pay warrants reports, and you will see exactly down to the most basic level where everything was spent and where the funds came from as well.
Yeah, so we get audited by Bailey, the county office. We've also had CalPERS come in, CalSTRS come in. So we get audited and are asked for documentation. So our offices are really good in having all documentation in order, because we know that we will get audited and they could pull any warrant, any payroll. So we have to be ready and give them the, yeah.
So in the 3 years that I've been here, we have initiated internally an external contract to come in and do an audit at a site. And that's because business services identified a discrepancy in terms of the financial accounting for the site. And rather than having our staff do the audit, we bring in a third party who then produces a report that we in turn follow through on or react to.
And that kind of helps make sure that we're aligned with everything before everyone else comes and audits us.
Well, and it also helps us to be proactive in case there is any borderline infraction from a legal standpoint.
Yeah.
Right, and that's just best practice, getting a third independent entity to do run your audits. And you said that there was about 3 times that you
It's been
guys,
2 and 3 years.
2 and 3 years. But isn't it the case that we use Ed Bailey in those times as well?
We have used ID Bailey, but as per the direction of the board, Dr. Drake has an RFP out for a new auditor.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on. I know we're already at 7:30, so we're over the scheduled budget meeting, but we're gonna continue here.
So the items that follow this slide are items that the board has seen in their Masters in Governance training specific to school finance. I have included them because I myself use them as a reference point. I am not going to review every document because in fact, the Business Services Department has provided a positive qualified budget every year for the past 3 years. We have received positive feedback on any report that we have submitted. But I do want to make sure that the board at its leisure have the documents. specifically to common mistakes that school districts make around school finance, as well as what FICMAT is looking for in terms of districts who may in fact need outside intervention. We did attempt to leave time for questions, and also if there's additional information that the board would like to hear about at future board meetings.
So with that, if I can take the lead on this, we're gonna start with Cesar and then just move down the line. So for all our board members to have an opportunity to ask questions.
For the
Go ahead,
public,
Mr. Ayala.
yeah, for the public, thank you, Mr. Lopez. For the public that has joined us, thank you so much. And you can attest that I have already made my questions or asked my questions, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ayon. Celeste?
Thank you again for the detailed information, a lot of information. But definitely a lot more understanding now going through each category in our budget. So thank you both to Dr. Drake and Yesenia for providing the additional information.
Thank you. Ms. Flores?
No questions. I like thank you for I know this comes with the CSBA. I don't think I got it when I first took the training, but I like the definitions of all the big words that are in here because this is a lot of information that does not fit in the brain at one time. But good work, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Cuevas?
Good evening. Yes, thank you, guys. Every time that you guys do, a study session for us for budget, I always learn something new, even though I've been on the board for coming 4 years now. It's gonna be 4 years. And it's great that, I can tell that you guys really work together to make sure that we understand as much as possible. So thank you guys for doing that.
Thank you. And, again, just to echo everyone's comments, thank you, Superintendent Irving, for your leadership and for all your staff, because it's evident here the amount of work that goes into, putting the budget together and making a school district, operate on a day-to-day basis. So thank you all. To our site administrators, teachers, everybody, our students. We do this for you guys and hold us accountable. Come to our board meetings, have questions, feel free to reach out to any one of us. And we'll direct you to, again, superintendent, and she'll make time to meet with all of you if you have questions.
Go to your school site council.
Yes, be involved, attend the school site councils.
Nope,
Nothing? Again, any other
no questions.
comentarios?
Yeah.
Thank you again, everybody, for your attendance, to my fellow board members, and to all the staff that came out here tonight, and to our community for tuning in. Wish everybody a good evening, and can I please get a motion to adjourn, please?
Motion to adjourn?
Can I get a
Second,
second?
Cuevas?
Second, it's, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? And we are adjourned at 7:40 PM. Thank you, everyone.
It's an early adjournment.